everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and welcome to part 2 of my color challenge, where I am dyeing multiple different colorways using multiple different techniques, using just 3 colors. The 3 colors that we are using are Creamy Peach, True Turquoise, and Electric Violet from Dharma Trading Company. I created a couple rules for myself for this challenge. I need to use all 3 colors on every colorway that I create, but they don't all have to be used in equal proportions. Ideally, I will avoid mixing. Some mixing is inevitable depending on the technique, but I am not mixing the colors together when I apply them to the yarn. It is okay if some bare color of the yarn shows through, so technically that white or bare yarn color can be a 4th color. And if I'm doing something like a semi-solid, which I did do, it technically doesn't fit in one of the rules, but this doesn't count as 3 different colorways. For the purpose of this challenge, doing the same technique, that technically this includes all 3 colors, but this counts as 1 dye technique. In part 1 of this challenge, we created technically 5 different colorways, and in that, even though we did do some triangle mixing, we successfully kept the colors fairly distinct. There was not a lot of blending on the yarn itself. Today, we might get a little more blending with some of the colorways we're going to create. I will be dyeing at least 4 more colorways, and one of them might not really fit with my rules, but based on the votes from the ChemKnits patrons, we will be doing an anticipation space dyeing technique. We will be dyeing a twisted skein of yarn 3 times. We are going to create some kind of gradient colorway on a sock blank. And finally, there's one more colorway in my brain that I need to create, which maybe doesn't fit with the rules, but does still use all 3 colors. And so that I'll save for the end. But now, let's go dye some yarn. Most of the yarn that I am using in this challenge is Knit Picks Bare Stroll Fingering Weight yarn. This yarn is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. And it's probably the base I've dyed more of than any other. If you'd like to learn more about this yarn base or other Knit Picks bare yarn, I do have affiliate links down in the video description. In a few of the techniques, I may start with dry yarn, but if I'm starting with pre-soaked yarn, I'm going to pre-soak it in just some plain tap water with some removable nylon zip ties for at least 20 to 30 minutes, maybe a little longer, but there's no acid in the pre-soak. The 3 Dharma acid dye colors that I am using for this challenge are Electric Violet, Peach Blush, and True Turquoise. And before I even started, I sketched out a lot of different ideas and possibilities of ways that we could proceed. Some of these I did in part 1, and some we are going to go after today. In part 1, I mixed 1% stock solutions of the 3 colors. And you can see already we are using a lot more of the peach than we are the purple and turquoise, mainly because the peach is significantly less pigmented than the other 2. So I've been using a lot more of it. I also have a collection of leftovers. Every time I have measured things out or rinsed out, whether it is a syringe or a cup, I've put the extras in here. And right now it is sort of just like almost a true blue, not like a bright turquoise, but a medium blue. I will continue to add extra dye to this over the course of filming today's video. One of the techniques that ChemKnits patrons voted for was a twisted skein 3 times. And this is one of my favorite kinds of techniques for layering color together. It takes advantage of the resist from twisting, and I'm lightly twisting, but twisting up your skein, dyeing it in the twist because the dye only has access to what is on the outside, and then letting it cool, retwisting it, and then dyeing it with the next color. So there will absolutely be variation between these skeins, but the technique is just really, really fun. In the past, I have started this technique with the lightest color and then gone and done the more intense ones. But today, I think I want to start in a slightly different direction. Today, I think I want to start with the blue, which probably won't absorb completely, but since we're going to dye in other layers, that's okay. So I think we'll do the blue first, then the purple, and then finally the peach, because this will allow us to make sure that some of the peach is visible on the yarn, because for the last dye, I can arrange the skeins to make sure that there are some of the palest sections still visible. With the turquoise, I will dye these dry, so I am going to just set these aside and we'll measure out the dye. For this project, I think we'll go with a slightly softer side. We are dyeing 300 grams of yarn with this technique. So first I'm gonna measure half a cup, or about 118 milliliters of our creamy peach. Next, we will measure out half of that amount. So just a quarter cup, or about 60 milliliters, approximately, of the True Turquoise. And in this case, even though it's 2 to 1, I maybe should go 3 to 1 with that creamy peach and pump it up. But since it's the final color, we can decide to add more as needed. And finally, we are going to use a quarter cup of the Electric Violet. And these are our colors. In my dedicated dye pot, I have about 20 cups of plain tap water. And I'm now going to add half a cup of white vinegar. For conversion's sake, 1 tablespoon of white vinegar is about 15 milliliters, and a half cup is about 120. So a half cup of vinegar is about 8 tablespoons. I'm going to add the turquoise dye and rinse out the cup since our pot is not yet hot. Therefore, I can do this without the little cup melting. Now I'm going to let this heat up before we add our dry twisted skeins. Our turquoise is heating up and it will continue to heat up, but now let's add our yarn slowly. The nice thing about Stroll is it is very absorbent, so you can see that these skeins are sinking in really, really easily. And again, I am not going to worry about all of the color absorbing. I am going to leave the yarn in until I am happy with the color that I see on the outside, and we can use a yarn mop to help soak up any extra color as needed. But I'm going to go ahead and set a timer for 20 minutes. All right, it has been 20 minutes, and now I am going to carefully remove these without twisting as much as possible. It's okay if they untwist a little bit, but you can see we are likely going to have blue in most of here. And the other thing that I said at the beginning is that it is perfectly okay if the color hasn't all absorbed. The next color we'll be doing is purple. There's definitely something not soluble in the blue. I'm not sure if there's something that isn't completely soluble in the blue. Normally I would reuse the same bath for each color, but I'm gonna go ahead and rinse this out and reset the water in the same way for round 2, just so that way hopefully we make some washing at the end a little bit easier. Yeah, my pot is all stained blue. This is not normal. I'm gonna go wash it. But I don't think this is a case of something growing in the stock. I think that there is just a residue. I'm gonna worry about finishing scrubbing this pan later on, but I have reset with 20 cups of water. I'm gonna add a half cup of white vinegar, and then I'm gonna come in with our purple, since again, we are now cool. I will probably be able to use the same bath from the purple to the peach, but now I'll heat this up, and we're waiting for the turquoise yarn to cool anyway. Now we are going to untwist the turquoise yarn. Ooh, it is mostly blue. Even starting dry, there is a lot blue. I'm also going to squeeze out a lot of the liquid. Normally I would try to save as much liquid as possible, but today the reason why I am not, there we go, trying to save it is that we've already reset the pot. And the reason for removing liquid is that it'll make it cool faster so that way I can comfortably handle it. But you can see how much color we do have in here already. But again, this is why we started with this blue versus finishing with it, because it gives us a feel of how to layer the colors, and we can decide if we want more of any of the colors as we go on. But anyway, once this cools enough so that way I can twist it, then and the pot heats up, we'll get ready for step 2. All right, there is so much blue here. After we do the purple, I probably should have twisted tighter for that first one. There might not be a lot of unexposed area to be peach, but as I twist this up, I'm twisting a bit tighter this time. But you can see that the way I've retwisted it, there are light areas towards the outside. You can manipulate it a little bit. You can even move where you have the zip tie located. I'm not bothering. When the yarn is wet, I find it easier to sort of hold and twist from one end. Normally I put the yarn through both of my hands and sort of twist that way, but when it's wet, that's a bit harder to do. So I lay it on the counter and then twist one end up. This also is something that helps if things are still warm. And then maybe add a little twist if needed for that other side. Now these will probably fall apart really, really easily. So we're not gonna worry, but this would be pretty on its own. However, we're gonna go add this to our purple bath. We are nice and steamy. Come in with our yarn and just gently place it in. And I am gonna grab my spoon to separate the 3 hanks from each other a little bit and push it down in. And now we will wait 20 minutes. While we wait, I would like to take this opportunity to give a huge shout out and thank you to Karen Siegel, Claire, Jessica Parco, and the rest of the Fiber patrons. You'll see a bunch of their names on the screen right now. Patreon is a great way to help support the content here on the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. And ChemKnits patrons can get a lot of really fun perks that include early access to the Dyepot PS series, behind the scenes sneak peeks, and more. You can find more details over at the ChemKnits Patreon. You can find links down in the video description. The twist that you do when we're dyeing a twisted skein multiple times can affect how much of each color you see, how far they penetrate. The tighter you twist, the less the color will penetrate. And so I probably made a mistake with the blue in that I didn't twist it as tightly as I could have, but I think that nevertheless, whatever we end up with will be absolutely beautiful. So whether we're able to register that peach, or if that just has a smaller impact and sort of shifts a couple sections on the yarn, I think either way it'll be really beautiful. All right, it has been 20 minutes and I think we still, ooh, look at those light sections. This is beautiful. Just these 2 colors, very, very Rebecca with the purple and the blue and the blurple. I am attempting to let water come out. I'm gonna let this cool for a minute before we open it up. And now I wanna use the same dye bath for the peach. We obviously have not absorbed all of the purple. So I'm now going to add a skein of Knit Picks Stroll fingering weight yarn. I am moving it through and you can see that this is soaking up that color. And it did look like we had a lot of color in here, but it really isn't that much if you consider how pastel this lavender is. So I'm gonna leave this in here for a while, let it soak up that purple. We're gonna have to wait a while for the twisted skeins to cool anyway. This has cooled off a little bit, not a lot, but we can open it so we can cool more. And this time, ooh, you can see we've got some large sections where there is no purple yet, but I am going to remove the liquid again. And so as we are twisting for our final time, those largest patches of blue without any purple are going to be ones that we will try to make an effort to have on the outside, so that way we can try to get more of the peach there. But you can certainly wrap things up however you'd like. This is just the way that I personally try to do it. But again, this is beautiful on its own. It doesn't really need a third color, but we're going to do it for the challenge. You could keep going and you could layer 4, 5, 6 colors. The only reason why I stop with 3 typically is that 3 colors tends to end up feeling relatively balanced with good coverage, and you can often still see some amount of them individually, but then also all together. So anyway, I'm gonna let this cool until, oh, actually, it's cool enough. I think I can go twist it now. Before we go twist, I do want to make this dye bath ready. Oh, I had the heat off. That's not a problem. The silicone pads are finally coming off of these tongs, so I technically got a replacement pair, but they didn't have blue anymore, so I'm a little sad. There is a hint of almost, oh, that's a turquoise in the pan that still needs to be washed off. A lot of it's come off, but there's still some there. This time the bath is hot, so when I add our creamy peach, I'm gonna go rinse this at the sink. This looks really pastel. I don't mind that I have a fair amount of the turquoise and purple left over. I have a feeling we will be using that a lot. Okay, so I want these sections here to be more towards the outside. So I'm sort of manipulating the skein a bit to try to get it towards the outside as best I can. As I've said, there's already a lot of color on here. Okay, but we could try to manipulate things as needed. And so this section, you know, it's very blue on that side. Actually, that one is fairly blue all the way through. And so again, just by shifting things, we can try to have things on the outside. And again, as we sort of pop it into our hank here, we can, you could shift a little bit how things are. I'm going to twist this, I think, one more time. You can shift a little bit where things are placed, but the goal is to try to see a lot of the palest blue. So just by moving things, you get variation of where the colors are. And so that is what is so fun about this, because it's really hard to just twist things exactly the same way twice. And sorry if I'm doing this a bit off camera. Here is our colorway after this round, which again is gorgeous. I think that you could happily stop here with this one and have a really, really fun colorway, but I do want to add that peach. It's hard sometimes when you like how your colors are going and you know you could stop where you are, but you want to keep going to finish your color. The peach is not looking like there's very much. It might be just a little bit of a peachy hint, but I think that that also is okay. I'm gonna leave this for 20 minutes and then we will come back and see if we want to leave it in longer or if we want to add the yarn bop or what. Okay, it has been 20 minutes and let's see where we are. Ooh, we've got some like subtle peach hints. I actually really love all of these hues that we got. The peach really did mute some of those other colors in a very pretty way. All right, I'm gonna remove all of these. And I'm gonna set this aside so the yarn can cool. It'll take a while to cool before we can open them up. These colors are so fun. Okay, let's open this up. It's still hot, so I want to be careful, but oh, fun. I actually love the little pops of peach and the depth. There's still some really big patches of blue in here, but I think that's okay, and it's going to be peppered. Yeah, there's still some really big patches, but I really like how this has turned out. I think that if you wanted to make sure that you had a big section of color that got more interrupted, I would try to move, make an effort to move and shift the skein more with the zip tie before opening it up. But I think that this is all really, really fun. Very, very blue. And I would say great that that water is clear that we are pulling out. I'm going to set this aside to cool so we can wash it. But even though there wasn't a lot of white left, there wasn't a ton of space for all those peach hues to go. I now forget if we used 3 times as much on this one or on the Anticipation, but we still used a lot more peach than we did the other 2 colors, and it still is the minor player here. But anyway, once everything is cool, then we can wash it. It does look like all of our color absorbed. For good measure, we can plop this in, but I don't think that there's anything left in here at all. Like, I don't see any shift of any kind. Ooh, maybe got a peach spot. Oh, from the tongs maybe? Oh, funny. So I don't know yet if I'm gonna keep this lavender. I might use this. Actually, this is what we'll do. I have a little bit of purple in this cup and a lot of whatever this is. This jar is getting a little full, and so therefore I think it's worth bringing it over now rather than later. And let's add our lavender yarn. And this has a little bit of all 3 colors and will likely still be rather pastel. But since that jar was getting full with the leftover rinses, I figured that we may as well layer it on here. Oh, that's fun. You can see like how that color has shifted based on what has absorbed super quickly onto our yarn. But anyway, I'm gonna let this sit with the heat on low for about 20 minutes and then we'll come check in. All right, it has been 20 minutes and whoop, there's a little bit of something greenish left in the pot, but also that could still be, we could be seeing maybe something a little bit yellow with the turquoise staining on the pot. But anyway, I am going to go set this aside to cool. I have a feeling we will take a look at it more and use it as a mop more for this video. Another of my favorite techniques is what I'm calling the Anticipation colorway. Back from when I was trying to dye things with abstract sort of feelings. What I mean when I'm referring to an Anticipation colorway is something that is space dyed. I'm going to put the yarn here in this pan. We're going to add the colors to different areas and then not touch and just wait. And the Anticipation is because I'm not going to touch it until pretty much all the color is absorbed. So that is our Anticipation. Right here in the pot, I have 16 cups of water, and we're going to add a 1/4 cup approximately, or 4 tablespoons plus probably 4 to 5 of white vinegar. And now I'm going to come in and add the yarn while everything is still cold. I am gently going to twist. I'll release it in a minute, but I'm going to twist these skeins together before putting it in. And now that we're in, I'm going to sort of move it to help that twist relax a little bit. If I didn't twist the skeins, it's possible that one could be at the very bottom and one at the very top. So with them twisted, we are more likely to at least hit part of them. Plus it gives some nice blending. So you don't have to twist them. I just enjoy doing that. So now we're going to heat this up before we come and add our colors. In both the twisted skein and anticipation techniques, there's some amount of the colorway that we cannot predict. We can't know for sure how much white will be left or how much the colors will blend. If you use the same colors over and over, then maybe you can start to predict. But things might just interact also just because of how much you have it twisted or how hot the pan is. And this is part of the fun. So these techniques can be somewhat reproducible, but there will absolutely be variety between each of the skeins. Thankfully, we know when we blend these three colors together, we get beautiful blues. So even if the peach ends up being lost in a lot of these, the colors will still be beautiful. Now, as far as color challenge goes, one of my goals was to not mix the colors, was to try to use all three individually. But some amount of mixing is inevitable. And in part one, we really did aim more for all three colors to stand out in each of the colorways. And this time we'll have a little bit more blending. But what's fun is that everything we're creating is still with the same three colors. For this space dyeing, I am going to dilute each of our colors into 1 cup of water so I have a greater volume to add to the pot. This will help some of these colors spread a little more, and if we just added a tiny volume of dye, it likely would stay in just one place. Now, of what I had mixed originally, I have 75 milliliters of our creamy peach left. So that is how much I'm going to use. And then I'm going to use just 25 milliliters, finally doing that sort of 1-to-3 ratio I estimated. We'll see, of course, but we'll do just 25 milliliters of our True Turquoise and our Electric Violet. And so once our stove is hot, then we will go and add all of this onto the yarn. Let's first come in with our creamy peach and pour it on this area. And so it is going to spread more than where I have just put it, but I am very excited. So that's giving a beautiful peachy color. The blue is still probably going to be more intense. Here is our turquoise. You can see the intensity even though we have 3 times as much of peach. That is a big reason why when you have pre-mixed colors and you're talking about depth of shade, you really need to compare one color to itself. It's hard to compare a color to other ones. Now, I'm right-handed. I'm going to pour the purple down the middle, and I am going to do my best to not poke. I kind of want to poke. I cheated. It's not cheating because it's my colorway. The colors may spread. There were just a tiny bit sticking out and I just poked it. I didn't try to spread the dye. I will tell you what I see. What I see right now is I see some blue down here. Actually, there's this cloud of blue right there that is sort of moving through and encroaching on that peach. We may not end up with any peach left. And then we certainly don't know what's happening down beneath the surface, but I do see blue sort of going everywhere. So I am now going to wait 20 minutes and then we'll come back. It's only been 7 minutes, but ooh, it has been 20 minutes and things haven't moved substantially from where they started. I'm glad we did maintain a tiny bit of peach. And, oh, okay, it looks like the color has pretty much cleared. I do think I want to go ahead and add just a splash of vinegar to our yarn. That won't hurt. But I think what I'm going to do now is leave the heat on for 10 more minutes. Then I'll turn off the heat and let things cool off in the pot until I can comfortably handle the yarn. The water is still steamy, but I do want to go ahead and see what we have. So now, ladies and gentlemen, Let's raise this up. Ooh, there's a lot of white. This is really pretty. So the color has all absorbed, but I see a fair amount of white, and ooh, I love the way these colors layered. This is so pretty. Okay, I am going to carefully remove some, oh, we've got a lot of white over there. I'm gonna remove this, set it aside to cool so we can wash it. If I wanted the colors to spread more, I could have started with less acid. But even with the large patches of white, I think that this is still really, really fun. Next up, we are gonna dye a Knit Picks double-stranded sock blank to create a speckly gradient with our 3 colors. This blank is the same fiber content that we've been using before. It's the exact same yarn base. It is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. And what makes it double-stranded is that 2 strands of yarn are actually knit together. So that way, when you unravel this to make something out of it, you get 2 matched 50-gram balls of yarn. So if you're gonna make socks, the gradient will start and stop in exactly the same spot, and so you can get a perfect pair. I have a whole playlist of dyeing sock blanks if you want to see more techniques, but let's go over to the stove. I pre-soaked this sock blank for a couple of hours in just some plain tap water. I didn't squeeze out most of the liquid, I just sort of brought it over. We will want to add more liquid because I am on my stove with burners there and there. But now I am going to add 3 cups of water. Let's go ahead and do 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. This is a lot of vinegar for the volume of water that we have, but I do want things to strike on the faster side. I am going to scrunch this up a little bit. We are going to be forming our speckles in 2 ways. One, because we're going to be adding dry powder onto this blank. But the second way that we will end up with speckles is because of the resist within this knit fabric itself. So when you unravel one of these blanks, because of the way the stitches are, you can end up with paler patches and darker patches, and that is super, super fun. Since we are going to use the dry dye powders, I will be wearing safety glasses and a respirator mask and gloves while dealing with the powders, so I may sound more muffled unless I'm filming a voiceover after the fact. And for our yarn mop, which I'll have off camera, we have this really pretty Tonal Leave No Dye Behind that we started earlier in this video. I will wipe my hands on it so that way I can use up the residual dye powder that's on my fingers. This yarn mop is a gorgeous color on its own. I could very happily stay here and knit with it, but it'll be fun to see this layered with the 3 colors more concentrated. All right, we are heating up. Now, I'm not gonna worry about the colors spreading and mixing. If we wanted to make this more crowded with 2 blanks, then we could have more color at the surface. But I'm actually gonna start in the middle with our electric violet, and you can see that we're getting some spread already, but we're also getting these speckles where the dye is meeting at the surface. And that is really, really fun. Another fun thing that can happen with blanks is that you can get asymmetric coverage. So sometimes when you add color, you'll see more color on, say, one side of the blank than the other. And I'm coming in pretty heavily, at least in terms of speckles. So when I go back into the dye container, I'm sort of doing small passes, but I want there to be areas of more coverage and areas of less. And so you can see that from where some places the dye is hitting the water first, some places the dye is hitting the yarn at the surface first. I am going to reduce the heat, and next up we're going to do the turquoise. You do want to make sure your fingers are completely dry before going back into a dye container, because you don't want, and it's steamy enough that it's happening a little bit, you don't want it to paste on your fingertips. You want it to be able to go on the fiber. So in addition to wiping my fingers off on the yarn mop, sometimes I rinse and dry if there's still extra dye, but I also wipe them on a paper towel to remove that color. Now we are going to have, whoop, that's a lot of dye. We do have not as much pigment here yet. Still very steamy in here. The colors are going to overlap a bit. I do think I am going to want to move it a little bit because see there's this gap right there where the folds are sort of really pressed together. But I think we can do that and maybe do another pass in a little bit. For now, we'll focus on just these first passes. Because you can do everything just in one go, but there's no reason why you have to do that. Since I dye yarn in my kitchen, whenever I'm dyeing yarn, my pets are always in another room, and my kids are always on another floor or at school. But I still, when I switch from one color to another, make sure that I put the lid on the container because I really, really want to avoid spills. So, and this is also why I protect my work surface with a shower curtain. So doing multiple small passes over an area is a nice way to get a heavier speckled look. There's still going to be spread. You can see in the purple, there's still definite spread. But if I were to dump larger clumps of powder, it wouldn't really feel as speckly. But this is one of the easiest ways to pump up the volume on our orange, on this peach color. Because otherwise, it does feel like more muted than the others. Even right now, it might not be spreading out nearly as much as the other colors. But the nice thing is that when we have like a little area like, oh, there's a tiny bit of peach right there, or, you know, there's some purple and blue overlapping. When these unravel, they will be identical. So I think what I want to do is wait 10 minutes, and then we might shift this, not a lot because I don't want to cause like a lot of spread, but we might shift it a bit so that way I can add more color. The timer is still going on, but I wanted to come in for a moment because it looks like we've got all these great black speckles with the turquoise. Some of this is just dye that like is sort of sitting and not dissolving. Like it's just sort of hanging out there a little bit on the surface almost. See, like that's weird, and that's probably why we've seen some more bleeding from that color. So I just wanted to point this out. I'm not sure why that's happening or what we'll see. I mean, there's a lot, and I know I'm moving this sooner than I intended, but there's just a lot of stuff that doesn't seem to be dissolving. So we'll keep an eye on that. But right now, I would say my impressions with this color is that I like the turquoise from Jacquard better than this Dharma True Turquoise. The turquoise from Jacquard, which is more of a primary blue anyway, but that doesn't do this. And I haven't had the issues that I'm seeing with this True Turquoise with the color absorbing to the yarn. So I think that, I don't know if this is a bad batch or if it's a tricky color, but this Dharma True Turquoise I think is on my less favorite list. Not in terms of the final color, just in terms of what I can see we're gonna do in terms of rinsing. And therefore, I just shifted my plans for how I wanted to sort of go into the end with some bonus colorways. I still have, I think, 2 other colorways that I really want to do, but I was going to do a variegated layering powder randomly on the yarn type colorway with these 3 colors. But seeing how this is speckling low immersion, I'm not as much a fan. And so I liked the effects that we got speckling on the counter better. So I think that maybe this is a color that in general, even though there's some issues with it dissolved, it behaves better when dissolved. Just like Jacquard's Sun Yellow is not one I want to make a dye stuck of because it all crashes out and turns to like jelly. So that one behaves a little oddly as well. But I definitely don't remember seeing as much of these issues when I did, say, the triangle color mixing exercise with the Jacquard, fuchsia, turquoise, and yellow. So it's worth keeping all that in mind. And your results might be different. It could be something with my tap water or, again, my batch of this color from Dharma. But given that there are so many colors that are ultimately so similar to one another, it's okay to have your favorites, whether it's different brands that you're mixing and things like that. Nevertheless, this is going to be beautiful yarn. So at least we've got that. It has been 10 minutes and I definitely want more peach. I do want to see, okay, we've got some good color in that little valley right there. We've got bits of white. And the turquoise, you can see it's sort of like sticking there. Sort of tapping it. It does seem like there's definitely some color and particulates left. It does seem like it's likely settling in that area. So I think what I'm going to do is add a tiny bit more purple and a tiny bit more peach, but I think that the blue is going to stay put. I would have liked to have added a few more turquoise speckles, but since I have no idea what's going to happen, if these particles will settle and then bind, or if we'll just be rinsing it out once we're done, I figured we'll just let it be. But this sort of residue that we're seeing is reflective of what we've seen with this color over however many dyeing projects I've done with these 3 colors so far. As for the yarn mop, this is where we are. It's still very subtle, but we changed the character of it. I'm not sure if I'll be using this mop again for something else today, but at the end of the day, I will steam it for 30 minutes and probably wash it off camera. It has been 10 minutes, and I am going to come in with, I don't know, this is probably more than an actual cup, with a little bit more water and pour it on to the yarn. There's a chance that this is going to cause some of that blue to come down this way, but I do want a little bit more liquid in there. I am not seeing any blue tendrils. I'm seeing a couple purple tendrils move from that. But the blue, I very much want to leave alone down there. So I'm going to heat this for 20 more minutes and then turn off the heat and let it cool in here completely. Not only is this exercise a really great color challenge, but it's also a really good way to get a good feel of some different dye colors. I suppose I've used Electric Violet a fair amount, but the Creamy Peach and True Turquoise are 2 colors that I haven't used as much yet. And I'm curious how, no, we've definitely still got like clumps of dye down there. We will see what everything does. I am just giving it a little tap, but we will see. I'm just glad that I can actually observe something with the powder that sort of correlates what I've seen with residue on containers and things like that. The final colorway that I want to dye is something that technically doesn't really count with the rules that I set up, and that is I want to layer all 3 colors together on one skein for a layered tonal look. We know from our triangle exercise that we will probably end up with something that is in a blue, maybe slightly tealish type leaning family. I'm sure it'll be really beautiful, but because of the tonal nature and that we're going to be dyeing it 3 separate times, there will be some areas that have more of one hue than another, and I think it will be really, really beautiful. For this colorway, I got my 12-quart stainless steel pot, added 24 cups of water plus a 1/4 cup or 4 tablespoons of white vinegar. While it was cold, I added 2 grams of dissolved creamy peach dye plus 300 grams of yarn. Then I turned on the heat and stirred a little bit until all of that color was absorbed. Once most of the creamy peach had absorbed, I removed the yarn, set it aside, added 100 milliliters of our 1% stock solution of electric violet, so the equivalent of 1 gram, put the yarn back in, stirred it to distribute the color, and let that color set. Finally, once most of that purple had absorbed, I removed the yarn, added 100 milliliters of our True Turquoise stock solution, which as a 1% stock solution, this is also equivalent of 1 gram of dye, to the dye bath, added the yarn back, stirred it up, and let that final color set. So to recap, on our 300 grams of yarn, we had 2 grams of creamy peach, 1 gram of electric violet, and 1 gram of True Turquoise. These layered colors are so much fun. There are some hints of that peach still. One big reason why I started with the peach and then did purple and then blue is that I wanted to see the most, look at that, dramatic changes possible. There are likely going to be differences between these 3 skeins. Like one of them might have, some of them might be more blue, some might have some of those purple remnants where others may not. We'll see once the yarn is dry. But if I had started with the blue and then layered on the purple and then the peach, those differences wouldn't have felt as big. So starting this way was the most dramatic way to do it. But, I mean, we could have gone the opposite way. I just knew that the blue would take the most time to absorb, so that was the other reason why I picked this order. But anyway, now I'm going to let this cool so we can go wash it. I brought my pan over to the sink, and I do want to check and see how things are. I expect most of that color has absorbed, but with the blue, let's see. Yep, see, we've got little bits of blue on here. So I think what I'm going to do is try to soak up and press off as much of that, oh my goodness, as I can. And then we will try to wash this. So I'm going to start washing this with the blue part of the blank at the bottom to avoid back steaming and to rinse off all of the particles that I can. Most of the washing for this video is going to be done in a time lapse, but I figured that this was a nice way to deal with this yarn while hopefully preventing some back staining. Ooh, but look at that color. That is still so pretty. Okay, there's not very much left in there. So now I will take this blank and go wash it in the time lapse with the rest of the yarn. I added some Synthropol to the wash water because when I tried experimenting, well, with both the Synthropol and dish soap using Purple Pop, it does seem to help prevent some amount of back staining because I really didn't want this blue bleeding to go and turn that beautiful warmth on the creamy peach more of a blue. We do have some significant bleeding, but given that we saw a lot of undissolved blue dye that wasn't soluble for whatever reason, this washing and bleeding is not surprising. And honestly, is reminiscent back from a bonus colorway I did one year when it really felt like I had to resubmerge it and set it again to then help the bleeding stop. If I use the turquoise there, that might be the issue. But our yarn mop had no bleeding at all. It had a lot less dye on there. That wasn't really a problem. I did wash, I think with dish soap, given how much that is foaming up. But I wanted to be really sure that we didn't have a lot of bleeding. So if you are getting a lot of bleeding with blues, I do recommend that you go ahead and do a reasonable soak. You can add some vinegar, but if the issue is that there is something that wasn't soluble that is present on the yarn, you will have to go through different changes to get that to come out. This is, I think, our twisted skein 3 times. And the bleeding wasn't bad here. We really did not use that much turquoise on any of the other yarn. I think the highest percentage would be 1 gram per 300 grams of yarn. Our anticipation yarn has a bit of white, and I was a little concerned about backstaining, but some of that white area was pastel blue a little bit before we even got to this stage. So I want to point that out for the record. If at the conclusions I wonder if there was staining, but I'm actually not seeing very much bleeding right now at all. I think that I could have seen more spread on this yarn if I had started cold and with no acid. Finally, we have our layered colors, and I absolutely love how this turned out. I love the effects of just these 3 colors on top of one another and seeing little hints of them sort of beneath this more blue. There's a hint of some bleeding, but really it wasn't bad, and a soak made it a lot better. Here is the finished dry yarn that we dyed today in part 2 of my color challenge that I set for myself. And one thing that is immediately more clear if I just look at the yarn laid out today versus in part 1 of this video, it's that today we see a lot more blending of color. The techniques we did today show more of how these 3 colors combine versus what they look like individually. The sock blank is an obvious exception to that because here, well, in all cases, we applied each color individually, but we had the blank set up so that way we could keep the blue in a region, the purple and the peach all in separate areas. We have reasonable color penetration to the reverse side of this blank, but I expect that when we unravel it, you will see some modeling from the way the stitches are. In fact, this hasn't yet really started to unravel, but you can just barely see some speckling here at this little bit of an edge with deeper blue on a paler blue base. I am not going to unravel this blank today. What we would see if we unraveled this is blue speckles on a pale blue base that goes into a variegated purple and blue section with some areas of overlap in this transition area. Then we would transition into a more purple speckled on a pastel lavender base, again with a more variegated transition with the 2 colors, followed with a warm, almost off-white base with these deeper peach colored speckles. I would say of all the colors that we used, the peach did strike the fastest and spread less, but this is also because in terms of premixed colors, the creamy peach is a lot more pastel overall, and so if I wanted to get more spread, I would have needed to add even more dye than I did. Next up, we have the yarn that we dyed in twisted skeins 3 times, and these are so beautiful. I really liked the yarn and could have considered it, quote, done at each of the stages. After the first round of dyeing with just the turquoise, or the second with the turquoise or purple, I also think it could be really fun to do this again. Do the turquoise followed by the purple, and then over dye the whole thing untwisted with the creamy peach. I love the way that this pale orange really muted everything else. That being said, I really love these peach pops that we have in here. I feel like the yarn is fairly balanced overall, even with some larger blue sections. My only little tiny regret, which isn't really a regret because I love how the yarn turned out, is that I wish I had maybe twisted things a little bit tighter with the turquoise. Given how much this color spreads, that's one of the ones where we might have benefited from having it a little tighter if I had wanted less blue all over. Similarly with the peach, if I had started with it dry and maybe loosely twisted, maybe we would have had more peach coverage on the yarn. Nevertheless, I loved dyeing it this way and ending with the peach, and I mean, I'm always going to do more twisted skeins in the future. The blue spread so much on our twisted skeins and not very much here. Before I rearrange them though, this purple and peach combination right here is just so beautiful. All three skeins have all three colors on the yarn, but I think that what is perplexing me a little bit was, well, honestly, I think I twisted it too tightly and that caused too much resist. So therefore the colors just couldn't spread. I suppose another thing I could have done was have a greater volume of dye that I added, but I think that one thing I need to do personally is embrace white left behind. Part of me wants to go over dye this and make the contrast a lot more subtle. But the other part of me loves the wildness to it. Yes, we have long sections of pastel in areas, but we have it more broken up in others. So there could be some asymmetry to how these yarns might knit up, but that's also really beautiful. And so I would like to know what you think, and let me know down in the comments if you would over dye this or if you would love to knit with it as it is. Because I wasn't moving the yarn in the pot, the soft way that some of these dyes settled on the fibers is so beautiful. I'm definitely torn with this one between over dyeing or leaving it as is. I think it goes with a lot of the other yarn from this collection really well, and you could create some really fun fades with it. Our yarn mop is beautiful with this purple and blue base and then splotches and speckles of all three of our colors on top. I know some people might be mad that I over dyed that really pretty layered tonal, but I sometimes stop when I reach something I love, and other times I like to push and see where we can end up. And so I think that this is a really, really fun yarn. This yarn also reminds me that I love doing this yarn mop, wiping my hands randomly on a skein over pastel bases. And so that is something I'm gonna need to do more. Finally, we have our layered tonal, which is so beautiful. The peach really doesn't shine through very much, except for how it shifted our purple and blue that mostly did cover it completely. There are a few peachy hints in here, but when I look at them now, I also just see more of like a reddish purple as well. The colors we got here are absolutely distinct from if I had mixed 1 gram of turquoise, 1 gram of purple, and 2 grams of creamy peach together and then dyed the yarn. You wouldn't get these different hues peeking through in the same way, even if the color did break. Those of you who are better with color theory than me will know already that adding a little bit of a contrasting color can help mute something that is bright. And that is what that peach brought in here today. If you wanted more even color coverage, I would make sure that the yarn was completely cool and that the dye bath was cool as well before you added on the next color. You could see that as I added the yarn was soaking up that dye as soon as it was going into the pot. There wasn't a lot of time there, even with me trying to move and stir things as quickly as possible, which I think created something absolutely stunning, but is just also worth keeping in mind. I was expecting this tonal to be a little bit of an outlier, but it works really, really well with two of the other layered type of colors that we created today. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I had so much fun filming this color challenge and playing around with so many techniques using just 3 colors. I think that, okay, maybe I didn't follow all my rules perfectly, but I think that this has really helped me appreciate the diversity that you can achieve starting with just a few pigments in your collection. Look at what we created here. If I consider a semi-solid tonal of a single color as one colorway, we have 10 different colorways here. And that is absolutely incredible. A lot of times, aspiring dyers ask me what colors I recommend that they start with for going on their dyeing journey. And I think that you can get started and accomplish a lot with 6 or 7 main colors. I recommend that you get a good primary red, blue, and yellow, a cyan, a magenta, and a black. And then maybe a brown in there. But with those colors, you can mix and combine and achieve a lot of shades just with that limited palette already. And then as you're ready, you can expand into more pre-mixed colors. And don't get me wrong, I love pre-mixed colors. I use those all the time, a lot more than I do with color mixing. But if you're getting started and have a limited budget, make sure you get your warm toned and cool toned primaries, because those are, well, you need those to create everything else. And then go and play. I've done a lot more color mixing with Jacquard than I have with Dharma so far. But someday I'll do those triangles with some Dharma primaries, so then you can have that information as well. This video is super long, but I really hope that this whole exercise was really helpful to watch. I know it was really helpful for me to dye, and that is something that I am so excited to explore more and maybe do a challenge like this again someday. So if I should do another color challenge, what colors would you want to see me play with? If you love the content here on the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel, please make sure that you're subscribed and have your notifications turned on so you never miss a new video. And if you want early access to the Dyepot PS series, plus some other cool perks, please go and check out the ChemKnits Patreon. It's a really great way that you can help support the content that I do here. And that really does enable me to do series like this, where I dye so many skeins of yarn in just 2 videos. Normally, we have 10 colorways here. Normally, this probably would have been at least 6 different videos. Each time I dye yarn, I learn more and more and more. And I find the more that I try new things and push myself, I get a better feel of what I want to do going forward, the techniques that I love, the colorways I love, and things like that. And so I would like to thank you all so much for joining me on my yarn dyeing journey. It's really amazing if you go back and watch some of the first videos I did with acid dyes to see how nervous I was then versus how much more confident I feel now. And so if I can help make you feel more confident about starting your own dyeing adventures and sort of going for it and approaching a project with, all right, I wonder what will happen if we do X, Y, Z, then that is a win. Because don't forget, if you don't love the yarn you created, you can always over dye it. Unless you've got a black yarn, then you might not be able to add more dye, but you can always take the yarn and over dye it with enough color to get something really, really dark, if you weren't pleased with how it turned out at first. Thank you so much for watching.